It's great to see all of you. Some new faces too. Terrific. So I will, I'll get underway. We welcome all of you. There's a few of you here, but we also are welcoming all the people who watch these videos after the fact, and there's quite a lot of those. We've been very, very pleased to have people join us. So those of you who are live are sitting in this room with us, that's great. And those of you who are not live but watching later, welcome to you as well. My name is Charles Ehrlich. I'm Program Director at Salzburg Global Seminar. We wish we were doing this in person in our palace in Salzburg, but we value the fact that you're all here with us virtually. For those who do not know Salzburg Global Seminar, we're an independent, not-for-profit organization founded in 1947 to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. For 75 years, whether at our home of Schloss Leopoldskron, online, or in locations around the world, Salzburg Global Seminar's retreat-like programs have provided a forum for global exchange and transformation. Since our last webinar 2 weeks ago, the situation in Ukraine has deteriorated. At our home in Schloss Leopoldskron, we are currently providing free accommodation, meals, and other assistance to a good number of refugees from Ukraine. And although that's not the topic of today's webinar, I do feel compelled to say a few words about it. We remain a neutral institution in politics and geopolitics, preferring to allow people to discuss their legitimate differences and bridge their divides. Throughout the Cold War, our institution was one place where people from both sides of the Iron Curtain and from the Third World could gather and speak openly and candidly with their peers on common issues and concerns. After the Cold War, Salzburg Global Seminar was instrumental in working with partners in Russia and the former Soviet-dominated countries to build up university systems, civil society organizations, and other individuals and institutions interested in opening global dialogue and peace. But while we are neutral in politics and geopolitics, we are not neutral on our morals. Russia's recent unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, with death and destruction apparently perpetrated as objectives of the war and not merely its consequences, is illegitimate in all of its respects. The farcical justification that Russia needs to denazify Ukraine is as offensive as it is untrue, coming from a country that has intentionally obscured its own history of mass atrocity and has a history of covering up the Holocaust as well. I wrote a chapter about that in a book published with several Salzburg Global Fellows last year, published by Routledge. I can send the bit in the chat. For some who know me, you know that for 2.5 years, I worked as an advisor for the presidential administration of the Russian Federation, in which I tried to improve the justice system for all of Russia's citizens. But I've previously worked in countries such as Georgia, which has suffered Russian occupation, and I lived and worked for 6 years in Kosovo, whose majority Albanian population had shortly before that suffered persecution and ethnic cleansing on a proportionally massive scale. And during my legal career, I've worked in a number of other formerly totalitarian states. And although I identify myself as an Austrian citizen, I speak English with an American accent because I was born in the United States. My father arrived in the United States in summer 1938 as a stateless child refugee using the passport of a country, Austria, which no longer existed. I've seen firsthand the consequences of the failure of the rule of law. Justice and the rule of law are tantamount to civilization and our humanity. Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine, which it justifies based on its own repugnant and hateful propaganda, has underscored the need to return to the basics. We have a lot of rebuilding to do, just as Salzburg Global Seminar was a center for the intellectual reconstruction of Europe from our own founding 75 years ago. So today is not one of our usual programs, but it's an opportunity to introduce some of our recent work on justice and the rule of law, and to invite our fellows working on other subjects and the general public to come involved with our efforts as they continue to move forward. We originally conceived and designed this initiative before the outbreak of COVID-19 in discussions we had with 3 US-based partners, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, and the David Rockefeller Fund. We thank all 3 of them for their support and encouragement as we have moved forward, particularly under the changed circumstances caused by the pandemic. We've seen that in many countries, there's a growing recognition that effective criminal justice reform needs to look beyond the usual toolkit and institutions of the criminal justice system itself. We also recognize the pivotal contribution that global exchange could make to criminal justice reform efforts, including the seeding of new strategies across the world. Because of the pandemic, we've ended up doing all of our meetings online in 2021, and we ultimately brought together 67 Salzburg Global Fellows from 19 countries into small interlocking working groups. We looked for points of intervention and big, potentially transformative ideas that could help shape the future of criminal justice systems. In addition to just mixing people from backgrounds traditionally engaged in the criminal justice sector, we've also brought in fellows from education, health, business, media, and the cultural spheres. The rich learnings from these workshops are summarized in our report, and if you've not seen it already, Antonia will put a link to it in the chat. And I will say to those of you watching delayed the video, where you don't have access to the chat, from the video, there will be links placed to all of these reports and everything else that is going to be distributed during the course of today's webinar. So you'll have links to these, just look for them below the video. Our report is designed in a web-based format to be accessible, so you can dive right in. It's developed summary key takeaways, examples, and recommended resources. We will continue to highlight these examples through short reports, interview features, social media stories, and videos with our fellows. The next phase of the multi-year initiative includes 5 public webinars, of which this is the 4th, in which we are identifying some of the most promising global examples of violence reduction and criminal justice transformation proven through research to be effective, viable, and replicable. Today, I'm delighted that we'll be speaking with Teresita Escotto-Quesada, Samuel Karuita, and Miguel Cambray regarding initiatives that they are undertaking across Latin America, Africa, and the United States to combat violence and crime by focusing on education and youth safety. We invite policymakers, public officials, activists, and positions able to spearhead new reforms to join us for the next round of conversations and actions starting later this spring. So we welcome our 3 speakers today. We encourage you to post questions that you have in the chat box, and we can pull from those as we go through. And you can do that as we're going along. You can post some resources you think are relevant. We'll post some resources we think are relevant based on what our speakers are giving us. And we've asked the 3 speakers to focus on specific innovations that they have been involved with, which have achieved results and which will serve as inspiration for others. And they, I'm sure, will be very inspiring. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Teresita to lead off. And her bio will be posted in the chat by Antonia, so you can read that, and rather than me introducing her. She's been a fellow since 2015, I think was the first time we had you with us, and we're glad to see you again, and we look forward to seeing more of you. So Teresita, you can tell us about some of the exciting work you've been involved with across Latin America.
Yes. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Teresita Escotto. I'm from Mexico City. Yes, and I have been a fellow since 2015. I'm glad to share with you the experience of the Open Schools program. Antonia will kindly share the presentation with you, and we'll go on with the slides. Now, the Open Schools program started in Brazil in the year 2000, thanks to an initiative by UNESCO. The idea is that the school, for example, it offers formal education during the week. The idea is to open the school space during the weekends so that youth, the community, and other members can join in several activities. The main actors here are youth as the rights-based holders, the school, and the community. The program has been implemented in other countries in Latin America and also in Africa. Some characteristics are the following. Let me see. I think that, yes, Antonia is sharing the presentation because I don't see it. Antonia.
Apologies.
Okay. Okay, there. So these are the basic information about the open schools. There are some advantages. One of which is that it's a very low cost initiative. It will cost about $2 a year. Sorry, $1 or $2 per month per participant. It has also independent management, and it uses local know-how. Now, the open schools, you can show the next one, Antonia. Yes, thank you. So the main actors are youth, and also we think that youth is has a leading role of his or her own life, and it's a person who needs a sense of belonging, which usually do not have when there is a strong presence of violence and social cohesion has been broken down. Next. Yes, the next, yes, the school. The school space has to become an attractive space for youth. It has to be open, literally and metaphorically speaking. It has to be a space rather than just an address. It has to welcome and protect youth. As home, for example, school has been regarded as a safe place for youth, and school has lost this attractiveness over the years. Next. And the other main leading actor is the community. The community has to get involved and be mobilized, and it has to open up to school. Next. These two slides is like a step-by-step basic manual of how to set up an open school. I will not go through it, but we can look at it later if you like. I can tell you, for example, how easy it is to set up an open school, but the main requisite is that it has to have the political will and the will of the director of the school to open its space during the weekends. Next. And next. Yes, okay, so here I'm going to show you some photos about the activities that have been carried out in the open schools over the years. These are, for example, information posters about the activities. During the weekend, the project management team, they identify people who can offer various courses, various workshops. For example, you will see next also some of the next, yes, of here's another example of information posters. For example, there are workshops on music, and people can join in any workshop they want. And people, I mean youth, either youth that go to that school or youth that do not go to school. Also, any other member of the community, it doesn't matter the age. Next. The one in yellow, for example, is the program that one of the open schools in Brazil has offered. You will see it offers taekwondo, karate, graffiti, table games. You will see now the activities. Next. This, for example, is in Brazil, and youth are painting the school walls. Instead of painting the walls outside on the streets, they are allowed to do it in school. This is a way of preventing youth from joining activities which might be dangerous for them, mostly joining gangs, for example. Next. They do painting. All of these youth, for example, they are at high risk of joining gangs and joining other violent organized crime organizations, for example, and instead they can go during the weekend to do all the activities that they want. Next. Here, this is also scenes from Brazil Open School, and you can see here, for example, the different types of people who go. You see young people next to older people doing the same activity, and this is one of the things about Open Schools project, that it allows intergenerational dialogue and coexistence. Next. More activities are culture and music. This is a photo of a capoeira workshop. And the next one is a Guatemalan young man who is learning to play the trumpet. The thing about this is that he's blind, and yet he has been able to learn to play the trumpet. Next. These are some Guatemalan girls also learning to play the sax, and other Guatemalan young men learning to play the drums. The teachers, for example, they are from the community. You do like a survey to see who can teach what in the community, and they are paid just a symbolic amount. Next. These are martial arts. Next. These are kids painting, boys and girls, and anybody is allowed. Next. Computers. You see the beneficiaries, they decide which activities they want to hold. Next. Computers. This is in Dominican Republic. Next. These are a little boy learning how to speak on the radio, and another group on communication workshop. Next. This is again another mixed group of Guatemalan women and children doing handicrafts. Next. This is, as you see, this is a boy sewing and a girl reciting. The girl is just beautiful. Next. This is important because it shows a girl having lunch. In Guatemala, for example, it has been seen that between 15 and 20% of youth that go to the open schools, they do not go if there will be no food. So it means that this is their only food intake during the day. So this is a big way of attracting youth to go. Next. Some results, best practices, and success stories. I will not read them all, but for example, the program has been replicated in various forms in other Latin American countries. In 2004, the methodology was adopted by the Ministry of Education of Brazil, and it became public policy. In the Dominican Republic, when the project finished, the government of Dominican Republic decided to take over the project and contribute with their own human and financial resources. Next. For youth, it has reduced the exposure and involvement of youth in situations of violence. It has increased social inclusion and the sense of belonging among them. It has led to a return to formal schooling and a diminishing of the dropout rates. Next. For the school, it has become closer to families and to the community. It has become less violent in terms of incidents at school, for example, towards the teacher and among the students. And it has an emphasis on values such as human rights, tolerance, ethics, and culture of peace. Next. For the community, this is a picture showing, for example, a young girl with her grandmother. So it has become more interesting for the community, and other people from the community have become involved with the school. There are less violent incidents, and there's a better understanding of youth and their needs. And next. This is the final one. So this is some of, I think, that of the best results. The reduction of exposure and involvement in situations of violence. This is a picture of a school in Dominican Republic. Before we started the project, we were called one day to say that we could not go to school because a dead person had been found just outside these gates. So it's dangerous places, but it has become better. It has improved. The values that they share, and just youth being themselves and finding a place where to be safe and to communicate with each other on a safe basis. I think this is all for now. Thank you, Charles. Thank you to everyone.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Teresita.
I made it in 10 minutes.
You did, yes.
But I'm open to any questions later, okay?
We will have questions, and people should feel free to post questions in the chat as well, and then Teresita can think about the answers. But the questions may actually be very valid for all three people today. So we can definitely process those after. I'd like to move now to Nairobi, and we have Samuel over there. And Samuel, it's been 10 years since you founded the Peace Ambassadors Kenya, and I hope you will tell us a bit about your experience and your success. Samuel?
Okay, thank you.
Samuel's bio is going up in the chat right now for those who would like to check that. Samuel. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, Charles. Yeah, you can read about my bio later on. But above all, I always like presenting myself, as human, but human first. I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a citizen, and above all, what makes me human is that I've experienced, the joy of met needs, and I've also, experienced the pain of deprivation. So in a way, I've always been longing, for social change, for justice, and for peace. And that is what has made me the person that I am, today. So back to my presentation. Let me start by saying that a school represents different things to different people. To an economist, a school is an avenue for human resource development. For a social worker, it's an institution of socialization. But for me, I also see as a school, as a platform for peace building and social inclusion. And I say that one for three reasons. One is the realization that schools are hotspots for cultural diversity. So it represents an opportunity for young people to be culturally sensitive and aware. Secondly, also the realization that students spend more than 50% of their time within the school environment. So in a way, the school has a great influence, when it comes to molding, the behaviors, the attitudes, and the values of young people. And finally, realizing that schools as institutions of learning, there's always that opportunity, to introduce, and integrate, peace education within the mainstream. The education, curriculum. So in a way, schools can become platform of peace building. But we realize that, this is not always the case. In so many places, right now, we find that school, the school environment is not safe and it's not, secure. And I want to give an experience of my own country. And I'm in particularly, being interested in one critical thing. And this is, the continuous, use of violence as a way of resolving conflicts within the schools, institution. That has been one of the things that I've been preoccupied in and trying, to change. And to give a little bit of statistics within my own country, and according to some of the research that I've shown, it is clear that, about 16% of all institutions of higher learning experience violent riots every year, and the story does not end there. Even if you go down, cascade down into high schools or secondary school as we call them here, you find that I'll give an example. For example, just last year, 65 schools were burnt down by students, and these are teenagers, as a way to express their grievances. Between 2008 and 2018, there's been about over 700 arson attempts, in public schools, within the country. So that one tells you that there's something wrong that is happening, And out of, all this violence, there's also, of course, there are consequences. And the consequences we see is that students end up, losing their lives. They lose, their learning time. There's wanton destruction of, learning institutions, okay? And in some cases, we find that even some students are going to, they unleash the violence to the host communities out there, okay? And as a result, the police are invited to come and respond to calm down the situation. But in some cases, we find that their response is through the use of force, which again, makes the problem, even more complex, and there's more, destruction and even more death. Okay, so part up by what we were saying, a group of us, came to, together, and that was in 2012. And when I talk about a group, this was a group of, students, police officers, and school administrators, and together we co-founded an organization that is called Peace Ambassadors Kenya, that I want to share about our experience and what we've been doing. Okay, and whatever we wanted to, we were interested, in trying to, to see any ways of which you can prevent violence, but also transform the conflict within institutions of, of learning. And when we try to analyze the situation, we ask ourselves, what are some of the root causes? And we find that these are the same things, that you hear from all over the world. That some of the causes for that kind of violence would be maybe student indiscipline, peer pressure, things to do with, poor school management, competition over limited school resources, and so on. But you realize that these things in themselves are not, reasons enough for justification for the violence that we've been seeing. So there had to be another reason. So what we started by doing was, first of all, to convening, what we'd call peace dialogue within these institutions. But this one would happen post an event, post a violent event, and bringing these actors together. And when I talk about the actors, I'm talking about the students, the school administrators, the community members, and the police officers, because they were the actors in this conflict. And trying to pose that question, what is not happening, And what we used to see when we were beginning, we would find all these actors pointing their finger to the students, saying that they are the cause of this violence, And once we ask the student, how come, you're using becoming violent? And the student would tell us. For us, we strongly believe that violence is the only way we can be heard. And, that was surprising, that they were doing all these things, as a way to express themselves, because they felt if they are violent, even the government can listen, to them. Okay. So in a way, they had lost, confidence in other avenues of communication. For example, trusting, the school leadership, because they see the school leaders as, represented the interest of the school institutions and not the students. And also the suggestion box. For them, they see the suggestion box within the school, not as an avenue for expressing grievance, but as a tick box, a checkbox, institutional checkbox. And these things at the end of the day, okay? So that was a reason. So the next thing that we did is that we asked the students, everyone, all the actors, what is it that you really want? And these are some of the answers we get. Of course, we're expecting positive answers, but we got negative. The answer in the negative. The students said that for us, we don't want to be ignored. The school administrator said that we are longing for, we don't want to see violence, and we don't want to see the image of our institutions, being tarnished. The police officer said that for us, we don't want to see, unnecessary provocation. And the community members say that, we don't want students who are becoming a burden to their own societies. So in a way, after we listened to that one, what all these, actors were saying is that they were longing for peace, they were longing, for recognition, they were longing for justice, they were longing, for inclusion, okay? So that after understanding what was the content of the problem, that is when we formed, our initiative. And the approach that, we took for ourselves of analyzing different other approaches, we took the approach that I call the community policing, approach. And when I talk about community policing, approach, this is whereby safety and peace within institutions of higher learning becomes a shared responsibility, among all the actors, okay? And use the 3P models. As an organization, we decided to adapt, the community policing initiative. And in terms of the interventions that we chose, we relied on 5 major ones. The first one was, establishing peace structures in the form of peace clubs that becomes the entry within these institutions of learning. And also that are offered, patronage by the, the police service in Kenya, such that, now the police service again becomes the entry point for these clubs within the communities. Then the second thing was that after forming these clubs, then we started, having peace dialogues. We introduced peace education. We also introduced, peace advocacy. And finally, we also had, engaged these students, in community outreach. So overall, after doing all these things, what we have, we are beginning, to see, and what we consider new as the achievement is that one, we've been able to successfully to transform relationships, of all these conflict actors, such that we are seeing more and more increased, cooperation. And out of that, we've seen dramatic reduction in violence, especially in places whereby this initiative is running. The violence has gone down up to below 50%, in these places. And the benefits do not just, stop there. In terms of the students, what do the students get out of this? First of all, they're able to learn from a peaceful and safe school environment. Again, they can benefit, from the social-emotional learning skills, and also the volunteership that they undertake, once they're doing community services. It becomes, it increases, their competitive. It gives them a competitive edge, especially in the, as upon graduating, as they tend to get the job market. In terms of the school administration, they benefit by, of course, securing their learning institution, but also having a positive image, but also learning, from this model on how, to engage students and also how to offer holistic, learning bucket spaces for peace education. For the police officers, again, for them, I think I can say confidently that our initiative has been, what I call, consider a model, community policing initiative, because in this country, according to our Kenyan constitution, the police are supposed, to integrate, community policing within their work. So in a way, we are making their work easier, but also you're helping them, to also improve their image. But the most important thing is to transform the relationship, between the police. Young people no longer, fear the police officers. The police officers also, and themselves also don't see themselves. I can say that in the past, most of them that used to interact themselves, maybe they view themselves, as warriors for the communities, but these days they see themselves as guardians, which I would say is a positive, thing. And finally, for the community, again, it benefits, from the safety, a safe and secure and resilient, community. And also, since, the students and the police, come together and they go initiate, community projects, again, it contributes, to community development. So as I add, what I can say, as would be one of the greatest achievements that we've had is I can say that our initiative can be considered as a model for community policing approach towards transforming relationships of traditionally distrusting and competing entities to a point that they can be able to collaborate and make schools safe and peaceful institutions. And as we continue, I'm going to share more about some of the lessons that we've learned. Let me stop there for now. Thank you, Charles.
Terrific. Thank you, Samuel. And I won't waste any time because we lost a little bit of there. But I will hand over to Miguel Angel. And Miguel Angel joins us from Chicago, and he's actually new to this program. He's replacing our friend Eddie Bocanegra, who some of you know, and I hope all of you have a chance to meet, who's a very, very, very inspirational human being. And for those who don't know, but who know who Eddie is, he has recently gotten a job in the U.S. Department of Justice in the Biden administration, taking some of the successes that I think Miguel Angel will tell us about to a national level, and getting them included in the policy agenda. So I just hand over to Miguel Angel. Miguel Angel's bio is going to go up into the chat so you can see that. And Miguel Angel, over to you.
Hola, buenos días. Gracias for having me. I am Miguel Angel Cambray. I am the Senior Program Officer for Community Violence Intervention over at Heartland Alliance. I'm a proud son of Mexican immigrants, born and raised in the Chicagoland area, south side of Chicago. And just an asterisk, I don't think I could ever replace Eduardo Bocanegra. He is a friend and colleague for years. So this is in support of the work that we're doing. For those of you who don't know what Eddie and I have been able to work on for the last 5 years, I have about 20 years in economic development and community violence intervention and education. And we embarked, Eddie and I, on a journey together in 2016. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation for information sharing sake, but want to give you a sort of a premise of what brought Eddie and I to Heartland Alliance. We had a surge in violence, during the sort of pandemic of 2013, 14, 15 in Chicago. And we were seeing sort of unprecedented spikes that we haven't seen probably for a decade prior to that spike in violence. So part of the innovation strategy citywide was to create sort of a collaborative response to how do we address gun community violence sort of through a spectrum. And remember, in 2016, nationally, we were getting a lot of headlines around our Black Lives Matter movements in the US, in addition to sort of unarmed killings of Black individuals across the country. So there was a lot of social and civil unrest happening while violence was also increasing in terms of community impact violence. So Chicago leadership, philanthropists, and such came together and said, what are some sort of innovation strategies that Chicago can lead in these spaces of reform and impact and positive impact? One of those changes and innovations was investing into police accountability and diversity and development of officers. So the police academy that nationally everybody has sort of heard about, that the Obama administration began to hold us accountable at a local level after Laquan McDonald shooting went public in terms of the video of the African-American gentleman that was shot by police and killed. And then the verdict was, again, a part of the reform strategy of accountability and diversity and inclusion training. Another thing that came out of this sort of citywide, statewide effort was, what is it that we can do to better skill and develop peacekeepers and outreach workers across the Illinois and Chicagoland area? And one of those strategies that came out was the innovation of what is the acronym of CP4P, which is sort of an institute that creates a coalition of organizations where their full-time mission is to sort of interrupt gun violence in specific city neighborhoods throughout the city. And this is more of a intervention and retaliation strategy, where they respond to shootings and retaliations and create conflict mediation in a way that reduces impact and gun violence, and creating an academy that sort of teaches them the skill sets around motivational interviewing, teaches them the skill sets of de-escalation, trauma-informed responses, first responder responses, gunshot victimization response, immediate medical support, just basic elements of helping them. And the whole philosophy around the outreach systems is founded around credible messengers. So people from the neighborhood, people who were formerly incarcerated, people who were formerly involved in street organizations and enterprises become credible messengers to kind of execute these retaliation treaties or peace treaties or family support systems. And then the third innovation that came out of that year and that conversation was the idea of what would it look like if we have data and administrative data by the University of Chicago, the city, the Illinois databases, public administration databases that say, hey, these 7,000 individuals are key in driving the city's violence, right? And we can zero in on these top 7,000 individuals, and what would an intervention look like that would be designed for the highest risk individual to be impacted by gun violence or be the highest likely to perpetrate in gun violence. Hence, the idea of READI Chicago was born. And I'm about to share a screen right now, and hopefully I get it right and don't cut myself off. So give me a second really quick. Can you all see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up? All right, perfect.
Yes,
Hope my
yes.
sound quality is good. So this is just a quick sort of information and overview of what READI Chicago is. Just to start off, READI Chicago is an acronym that was developed that stands for Rapid Employment and Development Initiative. That stands for READI. We're playing with words here, just the idea of preparing people immediately with zero barrier to employment and zero barrier to support systems. It's important to note as I kind of talk along, if I talk too fast, just interrupt me and I'll go ahead and just sort of slow it down a little bit or clarify something. These are the patterns of shootings that I was sort of mentioning to everyone earlier. As you can see in the 80s, in full transparency, Eddie and I were perpetrators of violence in the years of the 90s. So this is our generational impact here and our street enterprise impact and our street involvement impact. But then you start to see the decline that I mentioned in the 2000s to 2009s. There's a vast reattachment to education, reattachment to employment. We were just deploying sort of programs and resources in the 2000s to kind of help engage people in positive activities and future economical access. But then again, you see what happened between 2013 through 2016. And it was just sort of such a spike that it drew a lot of attention both nationally and locally about how is it that we can address pervasive violence. So a group of us came together in the summer of 2016 and started to think, summer of 2017, and started to think about what is it that we can do in our expertise and our experience to create an initiative that will seriously address the individual's involvement or impact in gun violence. And our response was READI Chicago. And overall, the initial overall model template is providing cognitive behavior intervention, right? Which is also known as CBI. Create paid jobs, right? How is it that we create just paid jobs for folks to give them an incentive to get off the streets and, get away from, whatever it is that in terms of the criminal thought that they were kind of thinking through, and what are the support services that they need to support them holistically to sort of minimize their impact or involvement in gun violence. Are we good till now? Is my speed okay? My tempo okay? Okay, perfect. Sometimes my Spanglish eats my English, so if that's sort of happening, just let me know. It's important to note that READI Chicago was a randomized control study, and the intention of a randomized control study was to sort of intentionally see if it will work, having a control group and our observation group. One group gets the dosage, the other gets just observation, as it's stated. And this is what it really sort of was, is a collaborative discussion amongst researchers and Heartland Alliance. We sort of reviewed the evidence of what is the best practice. We traveled the country, better understanding what are the best practice in the areas of CBI, areas of transitional jobs, and then areas of supportive services in terms of violence intervention, outreach services, et cetera. So we visited programs and organizations across the country prior to launch, just to better learn what it is that other folks are doing that they find that works with a similar population. And then obviously just the simple version of what the research was looking at was, does CBT plus jobs really create some kind of individual impact for people that are most likely to engage in gun violence? So there's three ways that we designed the program model to sort of get referral systems. Community referrals, this is coming from neighborhoods. And I'll talk a little bit about the neighborhoods that we work out of, but we chose the top 4 neighborhoods of the top 10 neighborhoods most impacted by gun violence. We knew that we didn't want to shy away from the most problematic areas of the city, and we wanted to make sure that we were going after the individuals that needed the support and the service the most. So there was 3 ways to get into READI Chicago. One was a community referral. Someone in the neighborhood or organization identified you as someone that is likely to die or shoot somebody, and they think that you'd benefit from this program, so they make a referral. The other is obviously from the Department of Corrections, the Cook County systems, the jail systems, the parole systems, the probation systems, for folks who are highly involved in gun charges, battery charges, assault charges, homicide charges, attempted murder charges, that are, again, most likely to be impacted by gun violence. And the last one, which is probably the most complicated one, with our partners in the University of Chicago, there is sort of a database system that informs this database, our healthcare systems, education systems, police systems, Department of Corrections systems, Department of Labor systems, and it sort of produces this algorithm of information that assesses whether or not an individual is high risk or not, based on victimization, based on criminal activity, and based on patterns in public administrative systems for support and support needs. The model itself was about 24 months long. I say was because right after the RCT, we pivoted for 12 months, just giving us a more realistic timeline of how long people could be engaged. But the first edition of the model was 18 months of actual support services, cognitive behavioral therapy, and employment. And then the last 6 months of the model was just basic follow-up support, continuation of services if needed, just some case management systems. These are the things that we sort of based our theory of change on. Relentless engagement means before this program, most people will get funded to enroll 100 people. It could be any 100 people with some basic geographical and demographic information. For READI Chicago, it had to be those 100 people, and you could not replace those names. So it had to be Charles, Samuel, and Teresita. You can't replace them. It has to be them. And folks weren't used to that, right? Folks in the neighborhoods and organizations, they were not used to that type of retention and engagement commitment, because it's easier to find someone who wants the program than someone that doesn't want to be found, right? We were working with non-service seekers. CBI explained a little bit. For those of you who aren't familiar with CBI, it's just the idea of modifying behavior through dosages of services and cognitive behavioral therapy. And after 200 hours, the research shows that then the person starts rationalizing thought and disrupting impulse. So they say it takes about 7 seconds to decide to shoot somebody. What we want to do is disrupt those 7 seconds and change your mind that killing someone over gym shoes, or killing someone over a territory that's not yours, or the grief you feel for a killed friend. We want to disrupt your impulse to react on that emotion. So that is the essential benefit of CBI. I am a beneficiary of CBI. I got 25 years of individual counseling and anger management. It's something that we all strongly believe in, those of us who were former perpetrators of violence. Obviously, the employment opportunity, it's zero barriers. You say yes to the program, Samuel, you are employed by tomorrow. There is no drug drops, there's no background checks, there's no screenings. You are gainfully employed by Heartland Alliance by tomorrow morning once you come to orientation. And supportive services is anything from housing, legal services, medical health, personal health, mental health, emotional health, anything that you need to continue to support your quality of life and your disruption of violence. These are just some very high level sort of bullet points. I'll save you the read through. I explained most of it. Folks were admitted on an ongoing enrollment process, and cohorts were based on months of enrollment, not necessarily classroom dynamics, if that makes sense. Because again, the model was designed to impact individuals, not necessarily take credit for community-based reduction. We were really looking at reducing Teresita's involvement with criminal activity and or behavior that will result in death or homicide. Here is just a really quick graph that just shows sort of the core programming, some of the intensive programming, and then you obviously have a lot of individuals at the highest rate of impact. Everybody okay so far? I'll get through these 10 minutes, I promise. I'm wrapping up. I think what was most important when we started this launch, a lot of us had a lot of assumptions. We believed we knew what we were doing. Guys like me would come in and say, I've been doing this 20 years. I know exactly what I'm doing. And the truth is that none of us had any clue what to expect. None of us knew how COVID would impact our population in our neighborhoods. And nobody really thought about victimization more than we did of criminalization, right? So this is the person that we're serving. And if READI Chicago has done anything nationally, it's led the nation. And really, we have so much information about our participants, both administratively and individual, and through our own, institutional impact and research. We finally know who it is that's out there being shot and shooting. So we have 95% of our population is African American. 80% of our participants have been a victim of crime. Just hear that out. Most people talk about arrest and prison and criminalization, but we found that 40% of our population was victims before the age of 15. 60% was victims of violent crimes before the age of 16. And 80% were victims of violent crimes by the age of 18. So on average, our participant, even though we talk about young people, we have redefined young people because of, again, cognitive thought, developmental stages of learning. Our population is anywhere 18 to 39, and the bulk of our population is between 22 and 34, right? This is really the bulk, which is, again, when you think about people shooting and killing people, most humans don't rationalize a 32-year-old coming out to shoot Charles, right? So this is teaching us what are real behavior patterns from people that are committing gun crimes. And again, when you think about the homelessness, and a lot of our actual participants were parents. So when you think about generational gun trauma and the impact of trauma on future generations, these are all things that we were excitedly learning about. Really quick, this is what I'm most happiest about. Our findings and the way that we have been able to sort of inform the field of gun violence, not only at the White House in federal policy, but we're also technically advising other cities that are grappling with this issue, cities like Philadelphia, counties in Pittsburgh, cities like St. Louis. Everybody's sort of turning to us to say, hey, what is it that we can do to see violence and violence intervention differently? And one thing that I'll say most recently, we found out from our findings, we have enrolled over 1,000 men in our program in the last 4 years, just to give you sort of a sense of capacity. And we work with 9 organizations across the city. It's not us, it's Native organizations solving for Native problems in specific neighborhoods. So we have reduced victimization. We have reduced rearrest or involvement in homicides or gun crimes by over 79%. That is huge. We have stopped, reduced, or slowed down the probability of Samuel being arrested or rearrested or involved in a gun crime that leads to homicide. And then we have reduced Samuel's victimization by over 37%. Through the scope of these 4 years, we have admittedly had to have buried about 36 individuals. right? So we have had to support their families through transition of gun violence deaths. And we know what the cost of death via homicide is on average. It's about $1 million per homicide, right? When you think about the issues of homicide and the resources that homicide requires, it's about nationally about over $1 million per homicide. But this is what we've been able to invest in. We have engaged, I'm sorry, that should say 1,000. It says 100, but it should say 1,000. We have been able to engage over 1,000 individuals to actually take on the job. We have been referred more than 2,000 individuals. That's an old number. I apologize for that. And then again, when you look at the investment in wages and stipends, I talked about incentivized learning. We have put $9 million back into the neighborhoods that we're serving per the participants' pockets through wages, learning and development, through stipends for therapy, through support systems for their families, through just asset-based development directly to the participant and their families. And then you obviously the amount of investment that we've put into program partners and staff in the same neighborhoods. Our goal wasn't to come in and solve the world's problems in any specific neighborhood. Our goal is to continue to build capacity for Native organizations to continue to serve their neighborhoods, their communities. And that is our approach. And we will continue to invest into these neighborhoods and continue to invest into this population, both regionally and nationally. And lastly, you'll see the cost per participant on average. A lot of folks will say that's a lot of money when you think about economic systems in the US and how they do per capita and educational funding and all that other good stuff. But nobody bats an eye when you talk about security funding, safety funding, incarceration, mass incarceration funding. No one bats an eye that it costs $1 million for an unresolved homicide, right? So this has been an uphill struggle in the US to continue to work with policymakers to understand the cost reduction to intervention and the savings. You can, if it costs $1 million per homicide and we stop 10 homicides a year, right? We just saved you $10 million, right? But they won't see that. So this is, again, an ongoing sort of shift that we're trying to do as an organization and as a program, continue to work with policymakers, stakeholders. And again, going back to Eddie Bocanegra's success and new appointment to the Department of Justice, over the last 2 years, he and a group of others and a collective of coalitions across this country were able to push the administration, the transition administration, to allocate $5 billion to this type of work, right? It's never been done in this country. And then second, we have made this a public health crisis. Black men dying in America wasn't a public health crisis if you go back 7 years ago, right? But now we've been able to change policy and change the national narrative that this is a public health crisis, that at the vast majority of Black men and women dying in our communities across this city. So those are the two victories that we've had in the last couple of years, thanks to data-informed strategy development like READI Chicago. Charles, I don't know if that was 10 minutes or not. I apologize.
It was fantastic. Thank you. It's really, really glad you could share that. And it's been a trajectory during these this webinar series. So the last one we were doing data-based justice reform initiatives, and we're looking at how do you get this data out there, and how are they properly boxed for the people who take political decisions. So, and then of course, how does the public at large accept the data? And I guess one thing I'd like to throw to all three of you is this is precisely that. So it saves money, it saves lives, it provides a safer environment for children. We've heard from in previous webinars in this series, and it's in our report as well. We've heard that the single biggest predictor of violence is exposure to violence in childhood. And so the fewer children who are exposed to situations of violence, whatever that is, the better that they can grow up. And of course, we know that brains don't stop developing until people are in their 20s, especially with young men. And so people are adults at 18, but men aren't really adults at 18. Men are, well, you're lucky if they're adults later, but 26 or so is when the brains are fully developed. So this is very important to do work with young people, create safe environments, and as you've pointed out, it creates great savings compared to the alternative, which is locking them all up. So I guess the question here would be very concretely, how do you get this message out? Eddie's done a good job, which is why he's just got his new job. How do you get this message out to people? And if, for example, in many cities in the United States, there's been a surge in crime during the pandemic, a violent crime during the pandemic, it's much harder to talk about justice reform when people in general in society are afraid. And you can say it's cheaper. You say, yeah, it may be cheaper, but I want to be alive. And look at all this violence out there. We need to get tough on crime. And this tough on crime message, even if it's not coming from populists, even if it's coming from other people who are simply afraid because they see more violence, how do you get this message to them? I don't know.
If I may,
yeah.
I think a part of it is the changing the narrative of responsibility. So many times programs are designed to change the person being impacted by the trauma. So then we're re-victimizing the victim by blaming them as the perpetrator, right? So I think that we have to sort of shift the service mentality sector of like, who is responsible for this trauma and how can we help those that are impacted by trauma? And we do it in every other sector except gun violence, right? When you think about violence, we make it a choice. When you think about poverty behaviors, you gravitate to like, people should know the difference between right or wrong. And the problem with that narrative is the assumption that there's this universality of like, traumaless childhoods and environments, right? There's this sort of this perspective. I think second around narrative shift, when you think about places like the US, we have for-profit incarceration systems. Just hear what I just said out loud, right? You have for-profit incarceration systems. That is like saying you have for-profit cancer systems, right? Like people to profit off criminal behavior, people who are profiting off criminal behavior will continue to antagonize and narrate criminal behavior, right? And then the last thing I'll say in terms of narrative, when you think about when people say in the US something like there are more Black men in prison than universities, that is a false statement. That is a false statement, right? That's when there are more Black men and brown men and women disproportionately represented in the justice system. That's the right statement. But there are a lot more men who graduate universities and colleges in the US that are Black, right? So I think we got to start saying what we mean and not trying to sell this sort of umbrella narrative for everybody to sort of consume. And when that narrative starts trickling down through the media sources, to our communities, we then also buy the same narrative of like, what it means to be a person who commits crime. But we know from human behavior and research that anyone on this call, given the right circumstance, will commit a crime. Everyone on this call, given the extreme circumstance, will commit a violent crime. If we're all sort of impacted by Maslow's hierarchies of needs, if I take away your shelter, I run into one of your homes, I vandalize one of your humans that you love, you will react in a criminal way to protect what you love or your safe space. And I think that when you think about children and their proximity to trauma and their proximity to violence, that is a learned behavior in a lifetime that we replicate, right? When you think about even this Ukraine conflict, or when you think about the way adults, when I say adults, I mean folks in positions of power and leadership who make decisions of war, that's how we respond to conflict. But then we don't want kids who are impacted by trauma, gun violence, to respond to conflict violently, right? So these narratives are very conflicting, and we've been living in them for way too long that we have to start reversing those narratives for our young people.
Charles.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I think that thank you very much, Miguel. It's fascinating the work that you are doing, and I hope that we can work together at some point. I think that it's a shame, really, that people do not see the advantage of using preventive approaches instead of incarcerating people. You say that it costs $1 million per homicide, for example, a year. The thing is that it's not politically attractive to invest resources on prevention. People want to hear that this person has been caught, has been put in prison, and will be executed soon. That's what people want to hear to feel safe. That's what they want to hear, to feel safe. So of course we need to change the narrative. Of course we have to change how we not only how we describe, but how we present those who commit violence. I think that the media has a very strong responsibility in this area because it continues to stereotype the perpetrators and to show them, to basically to glorify them. Here in Mexico, for example, it has become very common to have soap operas regarding the drug cartel dealers, and children become obsessed with them and they want to become like them when they grow old. So the media, I think, is playing a very important role here. Now, I think I agree that it's a learned behavior. So it has to start changing, I think, from the school, from the early schooling, and within the family, because what we do not learn we are not born being violent. We learn to be violent in school and at home based on what we see and what we hear. So I think that it can be done. It's just that it's not politically attractive because it doesn't sell off. It doesn't pay off in terms of political support. See, so I think that so far that's my view on these points.
Thank you, Samuel.
Charles, if I can weigh in, one, I have to admit, the way you are saying that there is an opportunity, in using that comparative, data, to create a compelling story. But again, I think also that one depends with the context, for example, in our case here, what I've seen is that there's a general apathy, towards, reports and, data, in terms of consumption for that, although it is very convincing, and I'll give examples. We've had so many situations whereby even the government itself, has gone ahead, to initiate various, commissions, on different issues. For example, after the post-violence election, in Kenya in 2007, there was an establishment of a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation, commission that came up with very, very beautiful, recommendations, but that after that, there's no adoption, of those policies or consumption of the data that they collected. So from our own case, what we found to be more effective is especially using what I would call, stories of, personal change, okay, or stories of component stories of change, okay. So in a way, for example, I'll give an example. If I wanted, we've seen that our model is working, in one institution, and we want to introduce the same, in a different institution, okay. What we normally do is to try and really convince, the institutions we want to introduce to just convene, a forum, a dialogue, maybe it's a police student, administration, forum, and we bring students, and administrators, who have lived the experience to come and share the experience, okay? And we also, maybe invite even, the different, policymakers or people we feel that they have a lot to, a strategic role to play, to come and do what I would call to bear witness, and what we've seen, after doing this, is that there's always that question, how come they always ask themselves, how come that we are not doing, we are not doing this, and in a way we've seen that, that works, and we'd be able to replicate that kind of, model there. So I feel there's that opportunity of continuously, sharing the stories, whether it's on media, whether it's on direct, translation, and until we reach that tipping point, and the tipping point for me is about these things, is one, about continuously changing the perceptions, and then gathering that, kind of support, and continuously now also building or amassing, doing resource mobilization to be able to create that kind of change. I'm complete.
Great, thank you. I do want to allow people on the floor. Is there anybody who would have a question for? No. Okay. Well, then we carry on the conversation. I guess Samuel, you were talking about this cooperation between police and students, especially, and the community policing aspect, and people forgetting. And I think this is probably very applicable in the U.S. Narrative as well, that you have some communities which are subject to lots of violence, who would actually like to see more policing, as long as it's the right sort of policing. So the police aren't the enemy of the citizens of that particular area, but are actually, there is crime and violence, and there is a role for police, and making sure that inner linkage works up, and making sure that young people see police as a force for helping keep them safe, as friends, as it were, that the police understand that they are not the occupiers of a community, that they are part of the community, and have a role to play in that community, and that they are able to act at a community level. How have you built that up in Kenya specifically? From your own experience, how have you built up that level of trust, especially after you've had some waves of violence, like 2007 elections and other waves?
Okay, thank you, Charles, for that question. I think one of the biggest challenges, there's always that need, and most people, acknowledge that, they need that, kind of, relationship. But the hardest thing is always, what is the entry point? Okay. I would want to just share, our own, from our own experience. For example, in our case, we were privileged enough, to involve, police officers, late from the start when we were starting the initiative, so that you find one of our founders, within the organization is he himself, a police officer. Okay. And not just a police officer, but also a senior police officer, who would be able to also has some also what I would call some influence. Okay, so one of the things is about one, involve them from the start. Okay, so that you can build it, together. And when I say involve them from the start, I'm talking about now building a community policing initiative. Involve them from the start. Okay, and then another thing also is also to find what I would call I always see that there's always an opportunity, for collaboration from shared needs. Okay, in a way, we all want the same things. Okay, whatever devices is the strategies that you use at the end of the day, and once you find, what are the common goals, what are the common needs? Everyone, for us, everyone wanted peace, everyone wanted justice, everyone wanted an easy life and inclusion. Okay, so once we're able to define what were the needs, then it was able, to appeal to all individuals, self-interest, for them to be able to receive, this thing is beneficial, So in a way, you are fulfilling your mandates, okay, growing as individuals, as institutions, and achieving, the community agenda that you really want. And once now you do that one, you continuously look for example, for us, we are able to first of all, that the first goal, which was reducing violence. Okay, after we've done that, now the next question was, how can we build on this? I'll give you a very unique situation, something that we do to build this trust. One, we realized that, for example, one of the greatest needs that police officers require in this country is blood. Okay, most of them are involved, maybe in injuries, or something like that, and they require someone, to donate blood, for them. So what we did is that we offered, for them that for any police officers who gets maybe injured, okay, is ill and needs, blood transfusion, our members would always be there, as the first line of, willing individuals, to donate blood. Okay, so in a way, we transformed also our network, to be a blood donor club, to be able to donate blood, for the police officers. So in a way, that kind of, looking for different and innovative, ways of building on that, relationship also creates, more opportunities, to leverage on that opportunity. So I think look for that entry point, start, engage from the start, and build on that relationship in unique ways. There is always, an opportunity, to connect at the level of needs. Thank you.
Teresita, looking across Latin America, how have you seen the engagement of the law enforcement community in a positive way? Getting them as partners in this work.
Well, I can think of the example of Nicaragua. Nicaragua has a very important community police. And it was started after the Sandinista movement or during, but it has proved to be very efficient to stop crime rates in Nicaragua. It's police-based community. I'm not sure how it works, but I think it can be a very good example. In other countries, I am very, hesitant to talk about it. But at least in Mexico, for example, one of the big problems is that police is not being paid enough. So police, they don't have an incentive to do their work because they have to get money from other sources, meaning corruption. Otherwise, they don't have enough money to support their families. So I think that one of the big challenges that we have is to, of course, make a police career professional, but also to pay them well, so that they have this incentive to do a good job. In other countries, yes, I'm not sure, but I would suggest to look after the Nicaragua experience.
Great, thank you. Yes, because we know there's quite a lot of violence vis-a-vis the police as well across many of these countries. And
yes, in fact, for example, in Mexico, I mean, you see the police and you run away. You don't go to ask the police for help. No, you do the contrary, because especially, over the last years, it has become more dangerous to approach the police than to be far away from them, which is a shame, because the police should be there to protect us, not the other way.
Miguel, can I hand over to you and your experience in this program, I guess, with law enforcement?
That's a very touchy subject in recent years, or historically in the US, when you think about systemic oppression, when you think about systematized racism, when you think about the demonization that we've done to Black communities over decades and decades and decades of turmoil and mass sort of narrative development. But inadvertently, we still need public safety. We still need forms of public safety, and we still need systems of public safety to sort of support the safety building in communities. And for many of these officers, they are community residents. So, I think in sort of engaging police and police systems over time, we have to connect with the human behind the uniform and better understand what it is. We have to provide very specific training and development for individuals that are joining these high trauma first responder roles, right? There is a lot of trauma in these roles. There is a lot of desensitizing humanity based on what they see, very similar to soldiers. When you talk about a city like Chicago, you could only fathom what you see day to day in communities and high impact communities, right? You could just fathom. It's the same thing with the children are experiencing. These safety officers are also experiencing on the other spectrum of experience, right? So I think what we've been able to do with READI in Chicago is engage with them at the human level. We've been able to educate them about our participant and our participant experience and their humanity as well. And we have to build safety systems where we're all sharing data and information about sort of what is happening in real time in specific parts of the city. So we're a part of these regional data systems and meetings. We're a part of local, regional, hypersensitive and impact areas developing non-law enforcement strategies for violence interruption and community engagement. We have to be a part of that process, and we have to rebuild the trust in community and police officers. It is something that we have to do. And then lastly, I'll just say, we got to get to accountability, right? We got to get to some kind of professional level of accountability to increase the perception and relationships with officers. So in Chicago alone, a year ago, the public financials came out, and it turns out Chicago PD had over $400 million in overtime. Right? So when you look at it that way, that is 400 million reasons, right, why crime should continue, right? Where would that overtime go, right? So when you think about the incentive of policing, it's a lot greater than the incentive of peacekeeping. So it has a larger monetary value. So, you know, those are complex conversations that we're having and we're taking on in our city.
It is interesting. I mean, so you use the word peacekeeping, and there's definitely some people involved in classic peacekeeping of conflicts around the world who perpetuate conflicts because it keeps them in a nice paid job. We've seen that before as well. So it's the same context, as it were. And it's who are we doing it for? And it's making sure we've heard throughout this webinar series and throughout all of our discussions last year, we've heard quite a bit about the importance of stepping into the shoes of the community and what is making sure that the right people have a voice and elevating that voice up to the decision makers, because the incentives are often not attuned to what the people actually want at the bottom. And the incentives should be attuned to the governed. A government acts supposedly in the name of its citizens and needs to be legitimate to its citizens. Teresita, I'm looking at that. Yes. I realize that it's the end of our hour and a half. We lost a few minutes to the technical glitch. So I'd like to allow each of you a chance to have some final words. I recognize that some people may have other appointments they need to go to, and so we thank you for joining us and say goodbye to you. But I'd like to let Teresita and then Samuel and Miguel each have a final word.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Okay, well, I am available for any questions. I can share my email with you if you like. I just wanted to say that it's agree with what Miguel was saying, also Samuel. I think that one of the basic problems is the dehumanization of humanity. Perpetrators, for example, drug cartel dealers, they do not see the person as a person anymore. The person has lost its value. So it's very important to do some value building in terms of going back to recognizing the value, the dignity of the person, of becoming human, of seeing humans not only next door, but also in different contexts. I think that's one of the basic things that we have to do, especially now that we are facing this violence in Ukraine. So let's keep up the good work. Thank you, Charles, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Samuel.
Okay, I think my final word would be, that in the face of, widespread injustice and violence, there is always that tendency, to normalize it, to normalize violence as part of the society. But what we should be able to do, I think, is to disrupt, the systems, that perpetuate that one. And I see that we have 4 critical things that we can do in face of violence, and injustice. One is that we can decide, to remain passive, spectators. Number 2, we can decide, to attack the aggressors. The problem with these 2 first reactions is that, it escalates, the violence, and it becomes, a vicious cycle of violence. What I think, and I would say that we should be able to do moving forward is, 1, to go for that option of educating the perpetrators, so that they realize, speak up against, injustice and educate them for them to be able to know that there are different ways of reacting. Okay. And then finally, we also have a duty, to just, validate and support, the victims, okay, who are facing that situation. So let's go out there. Let us listen more. Let us, listen out and call out injustice, and stand out, with the, with all those actors, who are involved. And I believe at the end of the day, we can be able to create safer and peaceful, school environment, but also the communities. Thank you, Charles, for having me.
Thank you, Samuel. Miguel.
All I can say is, as you think about spaces of violence intervention, dream the impossible. When we launched READI, nobody believed it possible. When we launched READI, everybody said we were in over our heads. When we launched READI, everybody said it didn't work. And now the world wants to learn how, right? So when you're in space of innovation, always remember folks will gravitate what they're used to, and it's easier to fund or recreate something that's been done for 20 years, even if the evidence doesn't support positive outcomes. We know it's a funded source of model. We just got to continue to push fundings, foundations, investments, government to rethink innovation. And we need new strategies and new solutions for a new generation of the same problems, right? So we're evolving technology, we're evolving communication, we're evolving people, but our systems are not keeping up with the supply and demand of communication and technology change. And it's impacting our neighborhoods, it's impacting poverty. And it's going to just continue to sort of exaggerate the impact of community gun violence. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that we're not, as a world, prepared for chaos. As a world, the poor continue to remain poor, and we continue to just be a disposable population for the world that haves, right? So again, just stay in the face of innovation, regardless if folks don't have the same vision to have the foresight to see your future outcomes.
Miguel, that is a fantastic and very positive note to end on. Thank you very much. And, you know, it does tie into the work that we are planning on doing. So we've had the first year of this initiative, we've just been broken down to working groups where we've tried to identify the most inspirational innovations and paths forward. What we would like to do as the program moves forward is to expand the number of people who are going to be part of this initiative, bring in the policymakers, bring in the influencers, bring in the people who are in a position to do something across the board and learn from these examples. And it's very inspirational to hear sort of 3 different examples, but very much in the same vein, just in different ways. That Teresita, Samuel, and Miguel have shared with us today. And it's just very exciting to hear that these out there. And it is true, Miguel, you can't just take something that works in one place or doesn't work, as the data may or may not show, and just keep replicating it elsewhere because, oh, it worked once over there. It needs to be individualized, but these ideas can inspire other communities and be used in other communities around the world, and in widely different contexts. So, you know, in Nicaragua and in Nairobi and in Mexico City, it's different, and in Chicago and Philadelphia and so on. And so it's different in all of these places, but it's still very, very valuable to have this exchange. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We will end here. Antonia is going to put a screenshot up about our next event, which will be on the 22nd of March, so 13 days. It's Tuesday in 2 weeks. And that will look at empathy and human dignity. And we're going to hear from Rait Kuusa, who is the Deputy Secretary General at the Estonian Ministry of Justice, Marshall Levick, who's the Chief Legal Officer of the Juvenile Law Center in the United States, and Kari Mason, who is a special agent for the state of Michigan Attorney General's Office, who has, all of them have some personal stories to share with us as well. So that will be a fascinating dive into how legal systems have been or could be changed and some of their experiences. Because when the culture of justice shifts away from the focus on safety, retribution, and systems of incarceration, to consider models that focus instead on human dignity, personal responsibility, and human rights as core values, youth violence prevention can be even more effective. We need to recognize and respect the innate dignity of all humans, regardless of factors like wealth, social group, mental health status, race, or even their role as victim or perpetrator. Only then a society may deliver more lasting justice, leading to less violence and less social tension. Today's criminal justice systems often fail to deliver human dignity, even where it has been enshrined in the legal framework. So in 2 weeks, we'll be exploring reforms that have put human dignity and empathy at their core and have in the process produced safer, healthier, and less violent communities for the next generation. A final round of thank yous to our partners, the MacArthur Foundation, the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, the David Rockefeller Fund, to our speakers, Teresita, Samuel, and Miguel Angel, who shared some really fascinating experiences with us today. To my colleagues at Salzburg Global, Ben Glan, who you heard from briefly earlier, Antonia Bemeke, who's been working everything behind the scenes. Thank you, Antonia. And everybody who's been here today, thank you for coming. A recording will be posted and will be up in the next few days. That will include links to the slides that were shared by Teresita and by Miguel Angel. Teresita just needs to make a couple of changes on her slides before we post them, but they'll be up within the next couple of days for those who'd like a copy. Ways to engage with us in the future: you can follow us on Facebook. You can subscribe to our newsletter. Antonia will put that up in the chat as well. And that will notify you about future events and other things that we're up to at Salzburg Global Seminar. If you'd like to get engaged in this initiative as it moves into the next phase, please write to us, let us know. And if you know officials or social entrepreneurs who might wish to benefit from small specialist off-the-record interactions, that might help them consider reform opportunities in their own jurisdictions and their own communities, and who themselves have innovative examples to share, please also, we'd like to hear from them. Please connect them with us. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you again to all of you and to our wonderful speakers. We will see you again in 13 days with our final webinar in this particular series of 5. So thank you very much.
Thank you.